Check her pockets, Dad. People like her always take something. Evan's line sliced through the air like a thin, cold, calculated blade. Dominique froze in the middle of the room, still holding the cloth she had been using to wipe the dining table. The small family gathering, wife, relatives, staff, fell silent at once. Eyes lifted, breaths halted. The world seemed to shrink around her. She did not say a word. She only pressed her fingers against the worn fabric, as if that were the only thing keeping her dignity standing. Evan stepped forward, his voice low, poisoned with contempt. You should fire her tonight, before she steals again. Arthur Bennett, the patriarch, took a deep breath. He was not angry. He was confused. His face carried that kind of pain that only comes when someone you love forces you to believe the worst. Marcus, Dominique's son, watched from the corner of the hallway. Big, dark eyes shining with controlled anger. He saw the billionaire's son slander his mother. He saw injustice grow like a shadow on the wall. He saw the truth trampled. And no one knew, no one could imagine, that he, a boy of just 12 years old, would be the only one there brave enough to save that night, and that whole house, from collapsing. But that was still far from happening. At that exact moment, the only sound was Dominique's heart beating too fast, and Evan's silent smile, almost imperceptible. Hours before that brutal accusation, the Bennett mansion breathed a different silence, a silence full of details that only those who work there every day learn to hear. The old clock on the wall marked time with a steady, almost ceremonial tick-tock. From the hallway came the scent of polished wood and the coffee Dominique had prepared for the family. Afternoon light passed through the large windows, drawing golden bands across the flawless marble. Dominique moved through the room with the precision of someone who knows every corner of a home that is not hers, but which she cares for as if it were. The Caucasian staff greeted her with respect, some with discreet smiles, others with small nods that carried genuine affection. Among them, she was welcome. She was valued. Mr. Bennett's current wife arranged flowers on the table. 2 younger children played with folded napkins. Relatives spoke in low voices, creating that homely atmosphere that exists only before tension sets in. Marcus, seated on the stair, watched everything. He did not speak much, but he saw everything. Every detail, every expression. The way his mother furrowed her brow slightly when she was worried. The way Mr. Bennett walked with slow steps, as if the weight of age and responsibility pushed his shoulders down. The house felt light, calm, almost welcoming, until the front door opened. A cold wind crossed the hall, displacing the scent of coffee and wood. Evan entered, an expensive jacket, aggressive cologne, the posture of someone who believes the world exists to revolve around him. Conversations dimmed, not out of respect, but out of the instinctive caution everyone had when he was present. Dominique felt it immediately, a tightness in her chest, a silent sign that something that night would not end well. Marcus noticed too. His expression shifted without his noticing. The look, once curious, became alert, almost suspicious. The late afternoon light, which had seemed warm before, lost color as Evan passed down the hallway. And the house, that house so full of routine, seemed to hold its breath. No one said anything. But everyone knew, deep down, whenever Evan appeared, something broke. Even if it was invisible. Dominique knew that atmosphere. The air always changed when Evan arrived. It grew heavier, colder, as if the whole house remembered something it preferred to forget. Even so, she continued her work, wiping the table, arranging silverware, straightening glasses. That was how she protected herself, keeping dignity in her gestures. But inside there was a wound that never healed. Dominique had never been accused of theft in her life, never. But she had faced something that hurt as deeply. Whispered comments about her skin, looks that treated her as invisible, and jokes that were only funny to those who had never felt their weight. More than once, at past jobs, she had resigned before being humiliated. She preferred to leave with her head held high than to wait for someone to show her, cruelly, that they did not see her as an equal. That pain, silent, accumulated, accompanied her like a shadow. Arthur Bennett watched everything from afar. He liked Dominique. He trusted her. But he carried an old problem. He had spent decades running from difficult feelings, especially when they involved his eldest son. Evan had always been a master at twisting situations and sounding convincing. When he spoke, Arthur felt that old weight again, the guilt of having been an absent father. Evan approached him that night with the confidence of someone who knows how to manipulate. "Dad, you can't keep ignoring this. She's taking advantage of you. Pure gaslighting. Done with social polish, the kind no one at the table would know how to confront." Arthur looked away, disturbed. The wife noticed something wrong. The other relatives did not. Dominique felt the tension tighten around her like a noose, and before panic could reach her, Marcus appeared at her side. He said nothing. He only touched his mother's shirt sleeve. A small gesture, but full of courage. His eyes met Evan's, and for a second, Evan seemed uncomfortable. It was not fear. It was irritation at being seen by the only person in the room he could not manipulate. A plate fell in the kitchen. The sound echoed as if cutting the breath from everyone. The entire room looked back, except Evan, who kept looking at Marcus, as if that child were a bigger threat than any real proof. The family had gathered in the main room. Light conversations crossed, silverware chimed, and Dominique collected dishes with her usual care. Evan watched everything with predatory calm. He waited. Waited until his father stepped away to greet an uncle. Waited until Dominique passed near enough. Waited until he was in the only spot where no one could see him. No one, except Marcus, sitting on the stairs, always attentive. It was quick, cruel, precise. Evan slid his hand to the side table where his father had left his most expensive watch. A collectible piece, heavy and gleaming. He took it with the naturalness of someone who has done this for years. And with the same smooth movement, he placed the watch in the pocket of Dominique's apron while she adjusted napkins. Marcus saw. He saw every detail. He saw the small smile at the corner of Evan's mouth, and he felt a cold rise up his spine. He opened his mouth to warn, but fear froze his voice. Then Evan raised his voice, loud enough to change the whole room's air. "I saw her put something in her pockets. I saw her take something from you, Dad." The room went silent as if someone had turned off the world's sound. Mrs. Bennet turned her face, surprised. Relatives stopped talking. The staff froze where they were. Dominique blinked, confused, until she realized all eyes were now on her. You can check, sir," she said, trying to keep her dignity. "I did not take anything." But when she put her hand in the pocket, she felt it. The weight, the cold of metal, something impossible. She pulled slowly, and the watch gleamed in the chandelier light. A fork dropped on the table with a sharp clack. No one moved. Dominique brought her hand to her mouth, eyes wide. "That is not mine. Someone put this here. I swear I did not touch it." Evan crossed his arms, satisfied. Victorious. Arthur went pale, confused, torn. Marcus, on the stairs, trembled, not with fear but with burning indignation. It was the first time he had seen his mother humiliated like this, and he knew exactly who had done it. Dominique still held the watch in her hand, as if it were something dangerous. The whole room watched, relatives, wife, staff, all as shocked as they were unable to react. Her face was pale, not because of the object, but because of what it meant. "Mr. Bennet, this is not mine," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I would never touch your things. Never." Arthur opened his mouth to speak, but Evan was quicker. "Dad, I told you. She literally took it. I saw her." There was no anger in his tone. There was something worse. Conviction shaped by force. False certainty. Studied theatricality. Mrs. Bennet frowned. One of the relatives murmured, "My God." The staff exchanged discreet looks, confused and uncomfortable. Dominique tried to breathe deeply, struggling to keep herself together. "I did not take it," she repeated more firmly. "Someone put it in my pocket while I was working. I did not even feel it." Evan let out a quiet, venomous laugh. "Oh, really? So now you're the victim?" Dominique's face flushed with humiliation. Marcus stepped forward, instinctively, but stopped when his mother touched his arm without looking. She did not want him to suffer more because of this. Arthur finally found his voice. "Dominique, this is very serious." There was pain in that tone. Pain and hesitation. He did not fully believe her, and that hurt more than the accusation. "I trusted you," he murmured, unable to look at her properly. Dominique clenched her hands, fighting back tears she would never shed in front of the family. "I never betrayed that trust." Evan, sensing his father's continued hesitation, intensified the manipulation. "Dad, this is embarrassing for the whole family. We have people here. You can't just ignore it." The room fell even quieter. Social pressure was an invisible hammer. And it was in that suffocating grip that Marcus finally spoke, with a small but firm voice. "She didn't do it." Evan turned to him with a cynical smile. "Oh, so now the kid is the witness?" Marcus swallowed. His eyes shone with anger and fear at the same time. I saw..." But the words stuck when Evan took a threatening step closer. Dominique pulled the boy back immediately, protecting him with her body. Arthur rubbed his face, pressing his temples. The confusion inside him was almost visible. He did not want to admit it, but something in that scene did not fit. Neither the accusation nor the way Evan insisted. One of the chandelier lights flickered for a second. A small crackle echoed through the room. Everyone looked up for an instant. Except Arthur. He kept his eyes on Dominique. And in that brief silence, he realized what he needed to do. He had to see the recordings. Arthur took a deep breath, as if pulling in the hardest air of his life. He looked at Dominique, and something in her face, something in her steadiness, even under humiliation, ignited in him the memory of all the years she had served his home with quiet honesty. And right there, in that moment, he decided, "Let's check the cameras." The room froze. His wife's eyes widened. Relatives shifted uncomfortably. The staff held their breath. Evan went absolutely still, only for half a second. But in that half second, his mask slipped. His jaw tightened. His breath hitched. His eyes blinked too fast. Only Marcus saw it, because Marcus never took his eyes off the real enemy. Dominique placed a hand over her chest, surprised. "Cameras, sir?" Arthur cleared his throat. "I installed some, for security." Evan took a step forward, so fast that even some relatives flinched. "Dad, that's unnecessary. This is humiliating. Why would you—" Arthur raised his hand, cutting him off. "Enough, Evan." It was the first time that night Arthur sounded like the patriarch he truly was. The weight in the room shifted. Dominique looked down, overwhelmed by having, for the first time that night, a chance to prove her innocence. "Please, sir," she said quietly. "I want you to see. I need you to see." Evan regained his posture, shaking his shoulders as if trying to chase off a shiver. But the silent panic was growing inside him. You could see it in the fingers trembling as he tried to adjust his collar. "Dad, seriously, we have guests. This is ridiculous." "If she says she did not take it," Arthur cut in, "then we will look." A heavy silence covered the room. Relatives exchanged tense glances. Arthur's wife placed a hand on his arm, as if afraid of what was about to come out. Dominique inhaled deeply and lifted her gaze for the first time, not toward Evan, not toward the relatives, but toward Arthur, a look that said, "I was humiliated, but I am still here, and I will prove the truth." Marcus stepped to her side and held her hand discreetly. Her hand squeezed back, a tiny gesture, full of gratitude. Arthur turned toward the hallway. "Everyone, let's go to the study." It was a sentence, a summons, an informal court about to form. And as everyone walked, Evan stayed behind for a moment, frozen, breathing heavily, as if the ground had begun to crack beneath his feet. Marcus, before leaving, looked at Evan over his shoulder, and he saw something he had never seen before. Fear. True fear. The hallway to the study felt longer than ever. Their footsteps echoed like hammer strikes. A slow, heavy rhythm, each person carrying their own weight. The wife, worried. Relatives, uncomfortable. Staff, afraid. Dominique, humiliated but steady. Marcus, tense like a drawn bow. And Evan behind them all, walking like someone being dragged toward an unavoidable fate. When Arthur opened the study door, warm yellow light illuminated the impeccably organized room. Books aligned, old paintings, a dark wooden desk glowing under a lamp. But what drew attention was the computer at the center, the screen still lit, the cursor blinking, as if waiting for someone. Arthur approached slowly, breathing as though each breath cost him years. Dominique entered right behind him, hesitant. She never stepped into this room without permission, but in that moment, she was not there as an employee. She was there as someone seeking justice. Evan stood in the doorway for long seconds, refusing to enter. Only when he noticed everyone watching him did he force himself inside, taking 2 stiff steps and forcing a strained smile. "Dad, seriously, we don't need to do this right now." Arthur lifted his hand firmly. "Evan, sit." The words sliced through the air like a ruling. Evan obeyed, not out of respect, but out of fear of losing control of the narrative. Dominique remained standing beside the desk, pressing her fingertips together, trying to stay calm. Marcus positioned himself quietly near the bookshelf, where he could see the screen, and see Evan. Arthur opened the folder of videos. Files appeared, each marked by the time the camera had recorded. Dominique swallowed hard. Evan's eyes widened for an instant, too fast for the family to notice, but Marcus caught it. "Dad, this is insane." "Quiet." Arthur clicked the first file, but before the video loaded, the screen flickered. A soft crackle came from the computer tower. For a second, Arthur feared something had malfunctioned. Evan held his breath. The entire room went silent. Arthur's wife covered her mouth. One of the relatives crossed his arms, uneasy. The staff drew closer, unable to look away. The video began loading slowly. The progress bar moved, millimeter by millimeter, as if the truth were climbing a mountain to appear. Evan broke the silence, his voice shaky, almost shrill. "Dad, we should talk about this privately." Arthur turned his head slowly. For the first time that night, his eyes were cold. "Evan, sit. Down." Evan froze. Marcus felt a spark of hope ignite inside his chest. Dominique closed her eyes for a brief moment, not in defeat, but in a silent prayer to God for the truth to finally have a voice. The progress bar reached the end. The video was about to begin, and nothing would be the same afterward. The video finally opened. The entire room leaned slightly forward, as if the truth had its own gravitational pull. The screen showed the side hallway of the house. Soft light, low ambient sound. And then, Evan appeared in the recording, entering alone. Looking around, opening the drawer of the side table, one of the relatives gasped. Arthur's wife placed a hand on her chest. The staff exchanged quick, stunned glances. Dominique lifted a hand to her mouth, not in surprise, but in pain. Evan, sitting in the chair, went pale. Dad, this is out of context. You don't understand." Arthur raised his hand without looking at him. On the video, Evan picked up a small object, a collector's pen, and quickly hid it inside his jacket. The room grew so silent that even the sound of Marcus's breathing seemed loud. Dominique closed her eyes for a second, tears retreating along the edge of her eyelids. Arthur stayed completely still, eyes locked on the screen, not blinking. Evan shifted nervously in his chair, ran a hand through his hair, bit his lip, muttered, "This means nothing. It's just a..." But his voice failed. The truth had weight, and it was crushing him. Arthur clicked the second file. The screen flickered again. Evan almost stood up, as if the chair had suddenly grown spikes. The new video began. It was the previous afternoon. Dominique arranging flowers, Marcus folding napkins, slow, ordinary, innocent movements. And again, Evan walked into the frame. Only this time, the gesture captured by the camera was even more devastating. He approached from behind, looked around, and slipped a small object into the pocket of Marcus's coat. Marcus's stomach twisted. His fingers trembled. He watched himself on the screen being used as a piece in a dirty game. Dominique let out a quiet sob. Arthur's wife stepped back, as if she needed air. Evan suddenly stood up. "This is fake. This is edited. Someone is framing me. Dad, you can't believe." "Sit down," Arthur's voice echoed, deep, grave, carrying a mix of fury and heartbreak no one had ever heard from him before. Evan faltered, one step forward, one step back, his breathing speeding up. Then Arthur opened the final video in the folder. And this one did not show the hallway. It did not show the previous scenes. It showed exactly what everyone had just witnessed at the table. Dominique working, Marcus seated on the stairs, and Evan walking toward her with a closed hand and planting the watch into her pocket while glancing around to make sure no one saw. The silence of that scene was deafening. The silence inside the study was even worse. Evan exploded. "Stop! Turn it off!" He lunged at the computer, pulled the monitor, slammed his fist on the desk, tried to rip out the cables. Dominique screamed in fright. Arthur's wife grabbed one of the children's arms. The staff hesitated, unsure whether to intervene. Marcus stepped back instinctively, not out of fear, but to think. Evan knocked the monitor to the floor with a harsh thud, kicked the computer tower, yanked the external hard drive connected at the side. The tower fell, making a hollow, frightening noise. Evan shouted, out of control, "You will not use this against me! You hear me? You won't!" Arthur stood frozen, in shock. Relatives stared, unable to move. Dominique trembled, clutching her apron to her chest. And in the middle of that chaos, Marcus ran out of the study. No one noticed. He vanished down the hallway like a silent flash. The truth had been revealed. But the danger was only beginning. The study now looked like a battlefield. The monitor was shattered on the floor, the tower dented, cables hanging like ripped-out roots. Evan breathed heavily, his face red, sweat rolling down his forehead. "You're not going to use any of this against me," he shouted, pointing at his father as if Arthur were the enemy. Arthur's wife stepped back, holding the arm of one of the younger children. The relatives were paralyzed. No one had expected to see Evan like this. Dominique had her hands pressed against her chest, still trembling. She was not afraid of what might happen to her, but of what Evan might do now that he had completely lost control. Arthur tried to speak, but his voice came out weak. "Evan, stop. Please." Evan gave a short, cold laugh. "Stop? After you accuse me? After this woman pretends she's innocent?" The venom in the word woman hung in the air. Everyone felt it. "Look at her," Evan continued. "None of you would believe her. My father is a confused old man, and she is just a black maid." Dominique closed her eyes, as if each word were a blow. Arthur finally found strength. "Evan, you crossed the line." "No!" Evan stepped closer. "I still have more say here than she does. You will not destroy me, Dad!" His scream echoed through the room. The staff at the door stepped back. Arthur's wife cried silently. A cousin tried to approach but gave up halfway. But in the middle of the chaos, while shouts echoed from the study and objects crashed to the floor, someone slipped away quietly. The house was big enough to hide soft steps, and noisy enough, in that moment, to drown out any small sound. A faint noise, almost imperceptible, echoed somewhere in the hallway. A soft click, a held breath. But no one in the room noticed. Everyone was focused on Evan, who seemed seconds away from losing control completely. Arthur tried to say something. Dominique trembled, his wife cried. And for a few seconds, the rest of the world disappeared. The meaning of that small, silent gesture would only be understood much later, when everyone was nearly losing hope. Moments later, while Evan yelled again and shoved a chair against the wall, a new sound cut through the window. A distant siren. At first, it sounded like city noise, but it grew louder, more distinct. When the sound reached the main hall, everyone turned toward the glass doors. Evan went pale. "Who called them?" he asked, with a voice that was no longer arrogant. It was afraid. No one answered, because no one knew, or thought they knew. The siren grew nearer, much faster than anyone expected, as if it had already been close when called. Then, heavy knocks at the front door. Firm voices, unquestionable authority. "Police department, everyone stay where you are." The room froze, and that was how the truth began to arrive. Not through the billionaire, not through the family, not through the staff, but through someone no one had noticed. Yet, the silence after the police arrived lasted less than a second, but it was enough for something inside Evan to snap. His eyes, once full of arrogance, now widened, frantic, as if a lifetime of masks had shattered at once. He looked from face to face, his father, the wife, the relatives, the staff, Dominique, Marcus, and something broke completely. "I won't lose everything because of you people," he screamed, his voice cracked, stripped of all control. Before anyone could react, Evan shoved his hand inside his suit jacket. The faint metallic sound was enough to freeze everyone's soul. A small black pistol, glinting in the study's trembling light. Dominique covered her mouth with both hands. Arthur's wife gasped. Relatives instinctively recoiled. Arthur stepped forward, devastated. "Evan, please, son, don't do this. Don't call me son!" The scream shook the room like thunder. Evan pointed the gun at his father. The staff stepped back into the corners. Dominique pulled Marcus behind her, but something unexpected happened. Marcus let go of his mother's hand and stepped forward, small, thin, only 12 years old, but standing like a wall. His body placed itself between the gun and his mother. Evan laughed, a broken, desperate laugh. "Look at this. A little hero? You think this changes anything?" Dominique grabbed the boy's shoulders, desperate. "Marcus, no!" But he did not move. Arthur felt his legs weaken. His eldest son was about to destroy everything, the family, the reputation, innocent lives, out of pure greed and pride. And in that instant, the final noise came. The front door of the mansion being broken down, a loud crash, rushing footsteps, strong voices. "Police! Drop the weapon!" Evan turned instinctively, pointing the gun toward the entrance. It was the worst decision of his life. 2 officers entered in tactical formation, but there was no time for negotiation. A single sharp gunshot echoed through the house. The bullet struck Evan in the shoulder, knocking him sideways, the gun sliding across the floor until it hit the leg of a piece of furniture. The entire room erupted in muffled screams. Arthur's wife cried in relief. One of the children ran into her arms. The staff stepped back, shaking. Dominique collapsed to her knees, hugging Marcus tightly, sobbing in relief. Arthur stood frozen, speechless, groundless. The officers rushed to Evan, handcuffing him as he shouted broken insults, a mix of pain and powerless rage. "Get your hands off me! I'm not done! You hear me? I'm not—" But he was. The fury, the manipulation, the lies, it was all over. Because at that moment, with his shirt torn by the impact and blood on his arm, not graphic, only stained, Evan Bennett finally appeared for who he truly was. An empty man, driven only by what he could gain, destroyed by his own greed. The officers lifted him by force. "You're under arrest." The truth had finally won. Evan was dragged out of the study, handcuffed, his arm pressed with improvised gauze by the officer who had shot him. He kept screaming, but he no longer looked dangerous. He looked broken. With the room finally safe, the officers took a steady breath and turned to Arthur. "Sir, we need to understand what happened here." Arthur still trembled. Shock had consumed everything. His mind, his body, his heart. He tried to destroy the evidence, he muttered, staring at the destroyed computer as if he were seeing his own mistakes scattered across the floor. One of the officers knelt beside the debris. The hard drive's damaged, but not shattered. He turned the device in his hands. "These systems often have automatic cloud backup. We can try to restore it." Relatives, staff, and Dominique stood silent, as if no one dared breathe until they knew whether the truth had survived. The officer connected the damaged drive to a tactical laptop. A blue light blinked on. The system recognized the device. Dominique covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed. Marcus held her arm, eyes locked on the screen. The officer opened the main folder, and the videos, one by one, reappeared. Even though Evan had destroyed everything, the truth was still there. Arthur ran a hand over his face, and silent tears formed for the first time. It was as if he were finally seeing everything he had avoided for years. Then the officer said, "We'll need to review these recordings with you, but..." He looked at Arthur, then at Dominique, then at Marcus. "These are more than enough to prove she did nothing wrong." Dominique broke into silent tears, not of weakness, but of relief. Marcus hugged her tightly. Arthur took a step toward her, and stopped, as if he feared he no longer had the right. But she lifted her eyes, still full of tears. And in that look, Arthur saw something that shattered him inside. Pain and kindness. After confirming that Evan would be taken into custody, the lead detective approached Arthur. "Sir, you should know, we were already driving close to this area." Arthur nodded, exhausted. "But the reason we arrived so fast," the detective continued in a softer tone, "is because we received a call." The room fell silent. Everyone looked at him. A call from... A small dramatic pause. A child. Dominique placed a hand over her heart. Relatives looked at one another. Arthur's wife covered her mouth. The detective added. The voice was scared, but incredibly brave. Arthur slowly turned toward Marcus. Marcus lowered his eyes, shy, almost embarrassed, as if his courage were a secret he had not wanted to show. Dominique hugged him so tightly she nearly took his breath away. Arthur, his voice trembling, murmured, "You saved us." Marcus bit his lip, fighting back tears. When the officers took Evan outside, the whole house seemed to let out a long breath. The tension that had weighed in the air finally began to dissolve. Dominique sat slowly, exhausted, overwhelmed, Marcus at her side. Arthur approached her. Relatives and staff stepped back respectfully, creating space, as if the moment itself asked for silence. Arthur stopped before Dominique, his expression devastated with remorse. "Dominique," his voice broke. I wronged you. Deeply." She shook her head, still trembling. You didn't know. He manipulated everyone." "I should have seen it," Arthur replied, tears falling. "I should have seen my own son." Marcus held his mother's hand. Dominique smiled gently, not because she lacked pain, but because she had greatness. It was the kind of forgiveness only truly good hearts can offer. And then Arthur noticed something. Marcus's jacket was slightly bulged at the pocket. A silent reminder from the video. Of the object Evan had planted on him too. Arthur said nothing yet. He didn't need to think. He knew the right thing to do. And it would come. Later, when everyone began to disperse through the house, shocked, relieved, and exhausted, Marcus walked quietly to the hallway where he had left his jacket earlier. It was still there, tossed over a small armchair. The boy picked it up gently. Something inside the pocket made a dry sound. Marcus swallowed hard. He knew what it was. With small, trembling hands, he opened the pocket and found the object Evan had planted on him days earlier, the same one filmed by the camera, the same one used to try to incriminate him. That tiny piece of metal felt as if it weighed tons now. Dominique approached, worried. "My son, what is that?" Marcus lifted his hand, showing the object. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Dominique brought her hand to her mouth, horrified as she remembered the depth of Evan's cruelty. Arthur, who had been walking down the hallway toward them to talk, saw the scene. His eyes filled with a different kind of pain. Not just the remorse from before, but the full understanding of how his own son had tried to destroy a child. He knelt, not out of physical weakness, but out of respect. "Marcus." His voice came out soft, sincere. "You shouldn't have gone through this." "Sorry." Marcus lifted his eyes, bright with held-back tears. And he did the gesture that changed everything. He returned the object to Mr. Bennett. Without anger, without vengeance, only truth. It was the final symbol of the boy's character. Even hurt, even used, even humiliated, he chose to do what was right. Arthur closed his hand around the object, moved to tears. Hours later, when the house was calmer, Arthur gathered Dominique and Marcus in the study. Not the destroyed study, but another one. Smaller, quiet, lit only by the soft glow of a lamp. On the desk were documents, some freshly printed, others handwritten. Arthur took a deep breath. "I cannot undo what happened," he began, "but I can make sure your future is not marked by injustice." Dominique tried to protest. "Mr. Bennett, we don't want money, only justice." Arthur shook his head gently. "This is justice, Dominique." He slowly pushed the papers toward her so she could see. Marcus would receive a significant share of the assets, Enough to pay for his studies, start a business someday, and ensure he could choose his own path. Dominique would have her house paid off in a safe neighborhood, along with a lifetime income that would allow her to work only if she wanted. Arthur continued, "This is not charity. It is recognition." Marcus looked at his mother, held her hand, and both cried. Together. Strong. Finally free. Dominique tried to speak, but her voice broke. Arthur stepped closer, and with deep respect said, "You saved my life today, and you taught me what my own son forgot." Later that night, when everyone was already heading to their rooms, Arthur walked to his. On the nightstand, he found something he had always seen, but never understood. A small plate, a glass of milk, a single cookie, his favorite cookie, the one he thought one of his children left there as a kind gesture. But now he knew. With his voice trembling, he called Marcus. "It was you, wasn't it?" Marcus blushed, looked at the floor, and nodded shyly. Arthur placed a hand on the boy's shoulder with a tenderness he had not shown in decades. Thank you for taking care of me." Marcus smiled, a small, sincere smile. The kind of smile that heals things money never could. The camera slowly pulls away. Dominique hugs her son. Arthur watches them with eyes full of hope. And the glass of milk remains there, a silent symbol of a good heart no one noticed, until it was almost too late. Sometimes, the greatest courage comes from the smallest among us. If this story touched your heart, I'd be grateful if you like and subscribe. You will receive daily stories, all crafted to remind you that kindness still matters.